Okay, we're back, we're live, and I am pointing to Maya van Rossum. She's right there, she's right here. Take a picture of Maya. Maya, smile, smile. Okay, smile. That's you. That's Maya. That's Maya. Okay, all right. And we're talking about the new Green Amendment, and this is very important because this is codified in a bill that was submitted to introduced in the Hawaii State Legislature, adding a right like the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, to say that everybody's entitled to a good environment. It's not asking much, and yet it failed today. And that's why this story is so newsworthy. And it's so important that we talk to Maya about the origin and intention of this bill and what happened in the legislature. I'd like to know about that. And what is going to happen going forward. Maya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate that you value this story so much, because this is a sad day, but a great beginning to hopefully a new movement in the state of Hawaii.
You know, from time to time, we talk to people in the School of Journalism, the journalism program, they call it, the communications department, UH Manoa. And what they tell us every time we talk to them is the most important story of our time is, guess what? Climate change. Because it's existential. There's not that much we can do about it. You know, we have to do something. And it's a threat to all of us, every single one of us, and the planet. And it's happening right now. We're late, way late. So that's why your movement is very important. So Maya, how did you get involved in this? This green amendments thing? How did you get involved in looking forward to the next generation or generations to come? You know, the new Green Amendment for the generations to come. It's very, what's the word, charitable of you to think of generations into the future.
Well, just like you, many of us do, right? Many of us care deeply, and we understand that if we want to protect future generations, we also have to protect ourselves here now today. So we're all connected.
Good point.
And I've had the honor of, for the last 26 years, bearing the title of being the Delaware Riverkeeper, meaning I have literally been advocating and fighting the good fight to protect the Delaware River on the east coast of the United States of America, a river that flows through 4 states. One of the biggest threats to our river has been fracking for gas from shale.
Wasn't the Delaware River where Washington crossed?
It was where Washington
crossed the Delaware.
He crossed the Delaware.
And Frozers took us off that night. Yeah.
and actually every year there has been sort of a historic recreation of that moment, but due to climate change, that recreation has certainly changed over the years. But we've been fighting very hard to protect our watershed from fracking. And one of our watershed states, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is a very pro-fracking state. And the Pennsylvania legislature, though, really wanted to make it even easier for the frackers to inflict their harm on Pennsylvania's environments and communities. And they passed an excruciatingly pro-fracking law that put in place automatic waivers from environmental standards and much, much more. And long story short, I and in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper and my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, decided we were going to challenge that law. But how do you challenge a law that's passed by the legislators and signed by the governor? If you want to do that successfully, you have to have some sort of higher power. Here in the United States of America, that higher power is found in our state and federal constitutions. And we looked at the Pennsylvania Constitution and saw in the Constitution, there was an old, long ignored environmental rights amendment in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution that recognized and protected the rights of all the people of Pennsylvania to pure water, clean air, and healthy environments. The amendment hadn't been used in any meaningful way for 42 years since it was added to the Constitution, but we decided to test it. And so we challenged that pro-fracking law, claiming it would result in a violation of the rights of the people of Pennsylvania to a healthy environment. And when the case got all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, a very conservative Supreme Court, the justices agreed with us and actually declared that pro-fracking law, many portions of it, to be unconstitutional because it would violate environmental rights. I realized that this was a monumentous victory. And so in Pennsylvania, we've been using that victory and that environmental rights amendment to try to raise up environmental protection in the state. But I then started to look at every state constitution across the nation and found there was only one other state that had a Bill of Rights amendment that recognized and protected environmental rights. That was Montana. And I decided we needed to change that. So I wrote the book, The Green Amendment, and
it's more than the Green Amendment. It's the Green Amendment for the generations. Am I right?
Yeah. So the book is The Green Amendment, Securing Our Right to a Healthy Environment.
Yeah.
The organization I founded is called Green Amendments for the Generations.
Got it.
And it's all about trying to inspire communities across the nation to rise up and seek their own, what I call green amendments, to be added to the their state constitution. And eventually, when we get enough states positioned in the right place and we have state constitutions with green amendments all across the nation, then we'll go to step 2, which is to seek and secure a federal green amendment.
And there is no green amendment now in the federal Constitution or in any part of the Bill of Rights or the amendments that have been made.
That's correct. In the federal Constitution, it doesn't talk at all about the environment. In the state of Hawaii, there actually is some really beautiful language in the state constitution about the environment and environmental protection, but the right to a clean and healthy environment is not in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. So it's not recognizing and protecting environmental rights at that highest level in the same way we protect those other fundamental rights we hold dear, like the rights to free speech and freedom of religion. Senator Gabbard saw the value of having a Bill of Rights provision and how that really raises up environmental protection. And so Senator Gabbard decided to propose a green amendment this legislative session, and it was moving beautifully through the process up until today.
Okay, so here we have this green amendment, and it's broad, it's vague. I'm sorry, but you know what? It would attach to the gloss in Delaware. The case you won in Delaware would be good precedent, or at least arguable precedent, for any state, including Montana, that had an amendment like this. And people would point to that. You know, which you have to have more than a relatively vague statement of the right to clean environment. You have to have case law defining what that is and enforcing it and taking affirmative, concrete steps about it. So, your mission is not over merely in having these amendments passed. You have a long way to go after that to gather the judicial gloss on it and to breathe life into it,
Yeah, you are absolutely right. But one of the things too, right, is constitutional Bill of Rights amendments need to be written with broad language, because they need to be able to cover the sort of the wealth of things that the people want protected from government interference, which is what Bill of Rights provisions are all about. It's about limiting government action so they don't infringe on the rights that are in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. And if you look at any amendment in the Bill of Rights section of the Hawaii Constitution, you will see that they are all written with broad language. The right to
sure, it has to be.
Freedom of religion.
I wouldn't argue that.
Yeah, and so you're right. But then what we do is then through government action and the tests of time and court cases, we define what those terms mean. We define what it means to have a constitutional right to a healthy environment. We build up that case law and we get a really solid understanding over time, just like we've done with all those other fundamental rights, which we've literally had in some cases for hundreds of years, and we're still litigating over them, right? So it takes time, but it's really
let me offer you don't have to have 50 states make amendments like this to lobby for an amendment to the United States Constitution. You don't. You can do it anytime.
Well, you can, but the truth is you need 3/4 of the states to vote in support. And that's a heavy lift, right? That's a high hurdle to cross. And if we were to just jump to a federal green amendment, we wouldn't succeed. But the other thing is, we also wouldn't get everything we need. The states have a lot of power when it comes to environmental protection here in the United States of America. And so, and the state constitution addresses state government action. So we need state green amendments to address state government action and state laws. And we need a federal green amendment to address federal actions, like to limit, to guide the Congress and the president and the federal agencies.
Federal infrastructure
Yeah.
and the like.
So we need both of them. And what better way to lay the groundwork necessary to get 3/4 of the states to vote yes on a federal green amendment than to be going state by state by state, getting green amendments passed at the state level and getting that powerful protection as we go along. So it's a process.
How did you get into this? Did you study this?
Well, I mean, I've been doing environmental advocacy. I am an attorney, for over 26 years. And through all of my work, trying to rise up and defend the environment and defend the communities dependent on a healthy environment, I have become acutely aware of how our laws here in the United States and in every state fundamentally fail us, because they are all about accepting pollution and degradation as a foregone conclusion and thinking, what are the permits we're going to issue to manage the pollution and degradation? The laws aren't focused on how do we prevent environmental harm. It's all about how do we license it? How do we, so, I was experiencing that, for decades through my work. And then when we had this pro-fracking industry law that was going to have such devastating consequences and make such a bad situation worse, and literally handed the keys to the castle, over to the fracking industry, which again was already inflicting so much harm. And we were able to turn to the Pennsylvania Constitution and this powerful language and defeat that pro-fracking law. That was the moment when I took my realization of all these years of how our current system of laws do fundamentally fail us and realized the pathway to fix that. And that is very literally to restore the power to the people by putting in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution their constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment.
Let me offer you this thought. Right now, the news has been replete with stories about various red states, I guess you'd call them, that have legislatures controlled by Republicans and Republican governors who are only too happy to sign voter suppression bills. And those bills, hundreds of them have been introduced, and a number of them are getting passed. And ultimately, it's going to create consternation and chaos over who's entitled to vote and when and so forth. And query whether the Supreme Court will act in time to make a difference for the 2022 election. Okay? So we have some state legislatures out there that are really living in the 12th century right now. And I don't know how you can think that they're ready to pass an environmental protection constitutional amendment like that. Those Republicans will never in a million zillion years agree to that, will they?
Well, first off, right, we're going to go state by state. So again, by starting at the state level, we have lots of opportunity because we do have great states like Hawaii where people are much more environmentally minded. And so again, we can be laying that groundwork. And also, you'd be quite surprised at, yes, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of opposition because in many states, the industry has a very heavy hand with their legislators. But at the same time, Republicans need clean water and clean air and a livable climate too. And so we actually are finding that we are able to get some really powerful key Republican support, not overwhelming, but key leaders that will come and join the movement. And in fact, that Pennsylvania case that was like that turning point for me and the founding, was the foundation for the founding of the Green Amendments for the Generations movement. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court Chief Justice that wrote the opinion, beautiful opinion, and led the way on that powerful decision was an incredibly conservative justice, amongst the most conservative jurists that people would talk about. And yet when you read his decision, if you are an environmentalist, you know how they always say, well, if you want to fall asleep, read that, read that case decision out of the courts. Oh my gosh, if you're an environmentalist and you want to be inspired, you just read the language written by Chief Justice Castile. Again, a very conservative Republican justice, and you will just be inspired.
What's the caption of the case?
It's Robinson Township Delaware Riverkeeper Network versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it's all in the book, in the book, but it also, if you go to our website, forthegenerations.org, you'll be able to see all kinds of information about that case and all the other states where this Green Amendment movement is really picking up interest and attention.
I mentioned at the start of the program that one of the great existential threats, according to a lot of people who follow news stories and try to develop priorities on what's important, is not defined as environmental issues. It's defined as climate change. So my question is: does the constitutional amendment in Delaware, in Montana, did you say Pennsylvania? No, Delaware. Pennsylvania, Montana, and one of these days Hawaii. Does that cover climate change? Does that give me rights, to deal with and have a better position vis-a-vis climate change?
So the Pennsylvania and Montana amendments, while it took a long time for them to actually get used, they actually both were passed in the early 70s, and they don't specifically mention climate, but the way the language is written about the right to clean water and clean air and healthy environments, through legal analysis, you can get to climate change through that amendment. But in this modern Green Amendment for the Generations movement that I founded, where I'm trying to inspire states to add new language to the Bill of Rights section of their constitutions, I've tried to learn the lessons from Pennsylvania and Montana. And also in every state where we are working, we're having conversations with the people to make sure that the amendment that moves in their state suits the personality of their state. And we're learning a lot of really interesting things and identifying some powerful advancements. And so the modern day Green Amendments that I actually encourage states to explicitly mention a stable climate or a livable climate. And in fact, Senator Gabbard had that language in the original version of the Hawaii Green Amendment that was advancing. Committees along the way removed the climate language, so it wasn't in the most recent iteration. But again, you don't need to have it in there. With the language that we had, we could have gotten to climate change issues in a really.
But why did they remove it? What was particularly objectionable about that?
Well, so it's sort of interesting. Legislators said, well, we can't commit to ensuring a stable climate for people. But that misunderstands what the constitutional amendment is about, right? The constitutional amendments, all the Bill of Rights amendments, you can't promise that all people in all places and spaces will have a right to free speech. But what the constitutional amendment is about, it's making sure that when government acts, that it is doing so in a way that protects and does not infringe on the rights that are listed in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. So if you have stable climate, clean water, clean air, stable climate, and healthy environments in the Bill of Rights, what you're saying is that when Hawaii government officials act, they must do so in a way that recognizes, protects, and honors their contribution, right, to protecting clean water and clean air and a stable climate. It's about making sure that they do it right.
What about me, though? Suppose I'm a landowner or a business owner, and I don't give a rip about the environment, okay? And I do not care about anyone's right to a clean environment at all. and I do things that are inimical to the clean environment, does this not protect me?
Well, so
Protect
again,
against me?
yeah.
Protect against me?
So this constitutional amendment would not be used by, let's say, you challenging the activities of your neighbors. This is not about neighbor against neighbor. The Bill of Rights section of the Constitution really is about government action and government activity. But we have to remember, when people in the state act, they are usually doing it because there's some law or regulation. There is government engagement in much of what we do.
Permitting.
And so when you've got an industrial operation that's spewing pollution into the air, right, or into the water, harming the coral reefs, they are doing that with the permission of the government, because the government gave them a permit that gave them the permission to pollute and devastate your right to clean water and clean air.
So it's like a trigger, like a trigger. If the government is involved even in giving permitting, then, then this activity can be stopped under a constitutional provision like that.
Yeah, and the amendment also requires government not just to not, do bad things, but to be proactive, because they are duty bound to protect the environmental rights of the people. And so there too, then the government becomes obliged to pass laws and pass regulations that don't just permit pollution that might violate people's rights, but that will actually protect the environment in a more meaningful way. So that
well, that's harder though. Can you imagine let's assume this passes at some point. Can you imagine somebody going to court and saying, the government should build this infrastructure? It's only $1 billion. And under this particular amendment, I as a citizen am entitled, I make the case that that the government should do this to protect my rights. And how about a mandamus order from the court requiring the government to build this $1 billion project? You think that would ever happen?
No, and the reason what we are finding with environmental rights, like with other, again, constitutional rights, is when people go to court to challenge the government's failure to protect their environmental rights, either because they are taking action that directly infringes, or because they're failing, for example, to put in place protections from PFAS contamination, right? From putting in place standards that will help protect people from PFAS and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals that are in Hawaii's environment, like so many other places. The court decision isn't, you government must do X, Y, and Z exactly to address that issue. The decision that comes out of the courts is that you have behaved in a way that's infringing on the constitutional rights, so you have to fix it. It doesn't order government explicitly how to fix it. It tells them when they're doing it wrong and orders them to go back and figure out how to do it right. So you're not going to be able to go in and decide that you think that you need this huge piece of infrastructure and go in and get a court to say, government officials, you got to spend $1 billion to build this exact thing. That's not how the Environmental Rights Amendment works in other states. It's not how it would work in Hawaii. That's not the experience we have with other Bill of Rights provisions. Again, it's really about guiding government action, and when there is overreach, when they fail, giving the people a mechanism to say to government, look, our Constitution is our expression to you of how we want you to govern over us. And amongst the things that we are making very, very clear, we have inalienable, fundamental inalienable rights that you may not infringe upon by action or inaction. And now the environment is one of them. So
very, very valuable. Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning of the process, though. So you saw what happened in Pennsylvania, you saw what happened in Montana, and you say, this would be a good state for that. This is a state where people are sympathetic to it, where the environment is certainly obviously worth protecting. It reminds you every day that it's worth protecting, and you go and you decide, I think I'll I think I'll introduce something, and you get Mike Gabbard, I guess. Mike Gabbard, Senator
Well,
Mike
I don't,
Gabbard.
yeah, I don't actually do it that way. I have a rule.
Yeah.
I don't pretend that I'm going to go into any state and make this happen. I'm here in my home state. I'm in Pennsylvania. I work in the 4 states of the Delaware River watershed. I'm not going to Hawaii and going to make this happen. My job is to spread the word, to inspire. And when a state decides to pursue this, to educate, to be a resource, to help them get it right and to avoid the pitfalls. And so what I do is through the book, through my talks, through great shows like this, I tell people about this powerful new pathway for environmental protection. And hopefully I inspire them, and then I wait for the phone call. And when somebody from the state, an individual, an organization, a legislator invites me in and says, hey, we want to do this here, come, let us partner up with you to make it happen in our state, that's when I'll go to the state. And so actually Senator Gabbard, I have a great organization that does partner with me in terms of educating legislators, the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. And I had done a couple of forums for them about this powerful pathway for constitutional protection of the environment. Senator Gabbard heard me speak. As a result of that conference, I think he got a copy of the book, and we connected up after that. And he said, I think this is an interesting idea. And we talked about it. And then he's the one who decided this was right for the state of Hawaii. I spoke with a number of environmental organizations, Surfrider and others, great organizations. And they said, yeah, we really like this idea too. And so they've been coming out in support of it as well. So it's the people of Hawaii that are making this happen. I'm just the resource. And then
Okay, appreciate that. But now I really would like to hear the track of it though. So the bill gets introduced, and it gets through what? Which house did it get through?
Oh my goodness. So it was introduced on the Senate side, and it went through 2 or 3 committees. And it also made it through a committee on the House side. I'd have to go through,
Okay.
look at
And
them all.
then, so it got passed through the Senate. Well, that's reasonable because Mike Gabbard is a senator.
Yes,
It
and it
started
did.
there.
You're right. It got all the way through the Senate. You're right. And it was now kicked over to the House.
Okay, and it got through at least one committee on the House side. And then today, what committee was it in front of?
Judiciary? The Judiciary.
Why a Judiciary Committee has a lot of range, I suppose. And what did they decide today at 2:00?
Well, they decided not to give it a hearing. It never made it onto their agenda. And in the absence of a hearing today, I know that there's a little bit more time in the legislature, but the way this amendment went through the process and sort of the referrals, and you know, your great Hawaii advocates understand the process better than me, but it has been made very clear to me that because there was sort of a triple referral, that today was the last day.
A triple
for the
referral
amendment
is
to get a
the
hearing.
kiss of death, yeah. If you have a
So-
triple referral, it'll never get through on time, so.
So,
And
well,
who is it?
that's what happened.
Yeah, that's really tragic. And was there somebody out there actually opposing it, Maya?
Well, yeah, you know, it's always quite amazing to me that there are some people who actually have the courage to stand up and say that I don't believe that you or your children or future generations should have a right to clean water and clean air, and I oppose this. So there were a couple of people in the various hearings that testified. The Attorney General of the state raised questions about the value of this amendment, and I find that really quite shocking. And so, but nonetheless, people take that to heart. But we learned some lessons. And so I'm really confident that with already the kind of foundation that we've built and the energy and interest, that we're going to continue this movement forward. And that this constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment in the state of Hawaii is gonna continue on. And we got some other, you know, really interesting things, right? Like one of the things that we have in the proposed amendment language that stayed in the language was the right of the people to the cultural values of the environment and the healthful values of the environment. So that means that this becomes a real powerful opportunity for indigenous communities in Hawaii who have such a deep relationship with a healthy environment, such an important part of their culture and belief system. This gives them Bill of Rights standing to vindicate, to champion their cultural values in terms of the environment and the healthful qualities of the environment. That's really speaking to the importance of the human health values, right? That
Yeah, but, but at the same time, there could have been people who were made uncomfortable by that and felt that it would lead to more activist opposition. And
well,
and maybe that was an apparently good idea, which actually made the bill less passable.
well, we didn't hear any opposition about those things. It really was about the Bill of Rights placement. And the thing is, I really believe, just like, when we talked about the climate language, again, this is really about strengthening and making sure that we're holding government accountable to honor and respect the rights of all the people. And the cultural values and the human health values of a healthy environment are really fundamentally important. So if it takes us a little bit more time, if it takes us another year to make sure the legislators and the people of Hawaii understand the importance and value of that language so that they pass it next time around, it's worth it, because we get so much for the people of Hawaii if we can include that kind of language. And by going, through the process again, we can, even though some of the legislators took the climate language out of the amendment, doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Next year's proposal, we can try again, because as you've been, pointing out, Jay, the climate crisis, this is an existential threat to present and future generations. And it really warrants being called out in our Constitution and
Yeah.
giving that highest protection.
So
and so we'll have the opportunity to do that now.
What I hear you saying is that next year, in December, January, that bill will be submitted again. It'll have the cultural provision, and I would agree with this. It would have the climate change provision in it as well, both of them, a whole enchilada, and then let the legislature wrestle with the thing in full regalia. Yeah.
And we'll spend the next year, right? We're going to spend the next year educating people about how this amendment works, about why it's important, how it changes government decision-making to focus on prevention of harm first, not just managing pollution, how it raises up environmental justice protections and protects the rights of all people equitably, and how it makes sure that things like property rights that are so often used to justify pollution and degradation that harms everybody around, how property rights can no longer be sort of the linchpin trump card against environmental protection, because now, while there'll be property rights in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution, there'll also be environmental rights. And so it'll be a counterbalance. And now the government will have to make sure that they're balancing and protecting both. Those are the kinds of values that come out of this amendment. It doesn't mean a be all end all. It's not an instant panacea against pollution and degradation, but it takes the strongest legal tool we have in the United States of America, and it puts it to work for the environment. And that's really powerful. And as we can see, people are being impacted by pollution, water pollution, air pollution, right? The environment is suffering in devastating ways, which is impacting the economy in Hawaii and in other states. And we do have the climate crisis. And so we need something more. And this is a powerful something more.
Well, as you said, between now and the next session, which bills are submitted in December and January, and then the session starts mid-January, this would be a good time to socialize the bill way more than it was socialized up till now, so that every man, woman, and child knows the bill is pending or going to be pending and can get behind it. And I think in the state of Hawaii, a very liberal, progressive state for the most part, you stand a good chance of having state number 3 right here. And then you can go on to state 4 or 5 all the way to 50.
We want to definitely see Hawaii at the leading edge of the modern day Green Amendment movement. It would be really, really powerful. And the other opportunity we have over, the coming year is if there are other things that we missed with this language, that people would like the legislative champion, hopefully it'll be Senator Gabbard, to say, hey, would you consider adding this? And we can think about it. We don't want to put everything in there. It's got to be broad language. It's got to be comprehensive, but you have to do it the right way. So this isn't about throw the spaghetti at the wall. We want to make sure we do it right. We want to make sure we do it well. We want to make sure we do it elegantly. But if we miss something, we also want to know about it now so we can make sure that those things, those environmental qualities that are really important to the people of Hawaii get consideration for this language.
One last question, Maya. How big are you? How many people, how many states, and how are you funded?
So at this point, we actually have 11 states already where there are Green Amendment proposals. They're all at different stages of the process. Some of them, like Hawaii, New Mexico, we also just, because of the Judiciary Committee, those judiciary committees, they also, the leader of that committee refused to put it up for a hearing. And so it got stymied by the process despite this overwhelming support for it. But we're going to be doing there's going to be another go in New Mexico next year as well. So 11 states already are considering this.
How big is your staff?
Funding, pardon?
How big is your staff?
My staff is quite small because we are just at the beginning of this movement. So I've got about 4 people, but 11 states with 4 people, that is really great. So there are a lot of people that are clamoring for this, and we are rising up to meet every moment. And I really ask every state, this is such a simple concept, but it's actually quite complex to get right. And so I work in a very hands-on way with every single state partner that we have, because I truly believe in this, and I truly believe in the power of getting it right, the importance of getting it right. So I always ask people when they're in a state, please partner up. Again, I don't pretend that I'm going to make it happen in your state, but I do know that I have a key body of experience and knowledge to bring to the partnership. So let's partner up, let's do it together. And the funding is grants and donations. I don't take business or industry money because I won't be colored by that. So it really has to be, the support of our communities that is making this happen so that everybody trusts in the process and nobody thinks that there's any untoward manipulation by some inappropriate industry, because I would never let that happen.
Good. Has to be that way, really. So hold the book up one more time. You can get this book on Amazon. Okay.
Get it on Amazon.
As we decided before the show, Maya, that you would read a paragraph that best encapsulates the message you want to leave with our viewers.
All righty. So, creating a groundswell for environmental constitutionalism may not prove as hard as it seems. That's because we've reached a moment of environmental reckoning. As Pennsylvania Representative Franklin L. Curry said in 1970, when he was first advancing the language that ultimately became Article 1, Section 27, population and technology have run amok through our environment and natural resources. If we are to save our natural environment, we must therefore give it the same constitutional protection we give to our political environment. This statement is as true today for our nation as it was in 1971 for Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Maya. Maya van Rossum, you're doing good work and we're behind you. Good for you.
Thank you, Jay. And you're doing good work, and I'm glad that we're partnering up together on this. You're a powerful voice for the earth and for the people, and I'm so grateful to be with you tonight on the show.
Well, good. Let's do it again between now and next January, okay?
Anytime you want to, I'm in.
Thank you, Maya. Aloha.
Aloha.